which is defined in law. And those things are the things that you always think about. A dye-tested surfaces, E. coli, levels above 1,030, I believe is the number. Whenever you get those conditions taking place, that's a public health nuisance. It has to be replaced. Just because it's old technology doesn't mean it has to be replaced. And many homeowners get the fear in them that say, I'm going to have to replace it because it's old. No, that's not the case. And the legislature intentionally did that so that nobody was confused, and local health departments who might be trying to bite off more than they can chew were attempting to do it. So they said no. Unless it's a public health nuisance, that system can remain. And we've taken that same approach with dry wells too. So, contractor registration. This is an important piece for everybody in this room here. I'll kind of add some things to what she has written here. There was a requirement for an underground rider that's been removed from the requirements for registration for the insurance. System-specific training. Okay, this is, I'm not sure where this is going to end, but the old code and the original draft said you had to have manufacturer training to be able to service X, Y, and Z unit. Well, there's various issues with that. So the state added some various other qualifications to that, and that one of which is like class 1, 2, 3, 4 wastewater operators are now put into there being able to service systems. Now, I don't know, so don't ask me, I don't know what that means for the person who needs to be up to date on every little nuance of that system from the manufacturer or how the parts get sold. I don't know how all that works. But they were concerned about the availability of service providers, so they were trying to open that scope up. That was their first attempt. I'm sure that there's issues with that. But because many of the systems we see today and that are spelled out here require more maintenance, we're no longer always just septic tanks and leach lines. You've got to do maintenance, and there's got to be availability of maintenance people to do it. So they're trying to address that issue. I'm sure this one will be something that will be hashed out further. But as of right now, it may not have to be system-specific training by the manufacturer. There may be other credentials a person can get to service systems. Continuing education requirement. I told you last time it was 8 hours, but we requested it only be 6, so it's still there for CEUs, but it's only 6 hours. Now, I'm going to put my little sidebar in here. This was our request, the one in red. Anybody who has outstanding as-bills can't register the next year. And we have a problem with that. You know, there are many of you who are very good in this room that you get them done, you turn them in, and we're done. The file's done, it's filed. But there are many who have lingered a long time, and it becomes very difficult to process this stuff, get everything rolling like it should. So the state put this in here that any outstanding paperwork would prevent your renewal of your registration. And I would add, as of right now, it probably will also cost you 25% late penalty. So the best thing you can do, when you're done with the system, you turn it in, you be done with it, instead of making it linger. And quite frankly, you're going to have to just build that into the time that it takes to do your job, instead of letting it go too long. Along that same line would be a final inspection with a pump test. You know, many of these systems require, most of you in this room know how to put a system in and do it right, do it level, and make it nice looking mound or whatever. The places where we see more of the mistakes happening is with the pump part of the system. So if there's a pump test that's required, those have to be done as prompt as possible after the installation, and that will also postpone your registration if those haven't been completed, because we haven't been able to sign off on the permit. So please make sure that those are completed as you go instead of waiting to the last minute. What I hate to see happen is right around registration time in January, I've got 10 people call and say, oh my goodness, I need to have inspections on my 10 and their 10 and those 10. It ain't going to happen. You're not going to get them done that fast, because if we got people lingering and they're trying to get them all done before registration time, you're going to have to wait. We're not going to get 30 done in a day. So please be on top of that as you go. We appreciate that. But that was added to prevent that problem from happening in the future. There are allowances for self-installers as well, and so homeowners, that's always been the case. Homeowners can install their own systems. I wanted to make mention before we get off this subject of statewide bonding, registrations, and how that's going to work. When the rules are adopted, there will be a statewide bond. You will register locally, but you'll have a statewide bond that you can use everywhere. The problem is this, and I mentioned this to Ohio Department of Health, and I put it in written comments to them as well as verbal. And said, what are you going to do in April when these rules become effective, and I've already registered everybody in January? I don't want to go through the debacle we had in 2007 in this mid-year registration. It was a mess for you. It was a mess for us. It was a problem. So I said, please be clear about what you mean when it comes to registering and bonding and all the rest when you adopt these things in the middle of the year. So they took note of that. We're hopeful. I can't guarantee this, but I'm hopeful that you guys are renewing right now, and your registration will last hopefully from January 14 to the end of the year, and then in 15 you'll follow those requirements. That's my hope, so that you don't have to mess with re-registration in the middle of the year. Anybody who registers after the effective date will have to follow those rules. So if you're an installer who just comes on the scene, you'll probably have to follow those rules. But what about everybody in the room? I try to make clear to them that that's a problem that we want to prevent from causing you guys any additional hardship than necessary. So they're aware of that. Is there any questions about? Yes?
Back to the last frame on the credit hours.
Yeah.
The 6 hours are people that are registered in multiple counties. Are they going to be allowed to stack those hours, or are we going to spend 6 here, 6?
My understanding, Bob, is that you can't. I mean, we certainly do that already. My understanding is that they want to be able to permit that to happen, that you can get them out anywhere, and that if you have multiple registrations, that you can apply those hours to your other registrations also. I'm hopeful that that's going to be the case. I think that's the intent right now. So, good question. There is an insurance piece in there, so you'll have to present a bond and that you're insured. And I can't recall the details of the insurance, but you'll permit a bond to us, and then we'll have to be required to also make sure that you have liability insurance too. So that's in there as well. Any other questions about registration? Yeah.
Is the state even considering pushing this implementing the rules until January 2015? I mean, 4 or 5 months just don't seem long enough.
Yeah.
Once they adopt them,
I don't know.
for the counties even to get their new rules in place.
Yeah. I don't know.
Manufacturers, because there's a lot of things in these new rules that's going to require changing.
Yeah.
And companies have existing stocks of things.
Right.
Now all of a sudden that's no good to be sold.
Yeah. It's a good question.
It's
In fact, it's a comment that should be
short-term.
made. So maybe what sometimes happens in rules is they'll become effective, but they'll put the date when this is being enforced out several months or whatever it is. So, I mean, that's a problem. I mean, I was most concerned about registration, but I'm sure there's other pieces.
Okay.
And I would make those. Have you addressed those concerns with them? Okay. So.
I mean, you could be stuck with
Yeah.
several $1,000s worth.
Yeah.
Just which there's other things with controls and things
Right.
like this, and
Right.
what are you going to do with it?
Right. That's an issue.
They're talking about MPDS eliminating the gravity systems. Okay, what if you get 50 gravity panels?
Right,
What are
exactly.
you going to do with it?
Exactly.
You got to have time to make the changes.
Right.
4 months is not enough.
I'll elaborate a little bit on what Jim said there. I've heard the same thing, that the whole gravity remote telemetry system is probably going to be a thing of the past, the way we understand it. They're a problem. People don't keep their phone lines. There's all sorts of problems. People move into cellular service. So it appears right now, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, that we're thinking everybody's going to be moving to a pump lock system. From
Correct.
what we're understanding right now.
Yeah, issues of flowing into gravity or into ditches that are too shallow, heavy rains that back up the unit.
Yeah.
Even if you got backflow preventer, the house is still running water, so it can't get out. There's just a lot of issues with them.
Right. So that's another piece that we're thinking is going to be changed here shortly. So yeah, good comment. Hopefully you've made those comments to the state too. Okay. All right. State fees, I want to make mention of this because you'll see some permit fees increasing over time. You know, we don't have any intention right now of increasing any local fees, but please be advised that as it's currently being proposed, $25 for new or replacement system is going to go to the state health department. That currently is happening right now. Every $25 your permit fee goes to the state health department. Right now, this number, see that? I think that's 0 right now, but it's going up to 15 for alterations. Then the following year, in 15, they're going to collect 50 from us, and 25 for alteration. And then the following year after that, it's going to be 74 and 35. So in 2 years, you're going to see a permit increase if this stays the way it is, $50 in a 2-year time. And that's the state health department. So I can't control that. If you don't like that, tell them. I guess I have mixed feelings about it. You certainly need money to operate your program. And I will admit, those of you who don't deal with the state health department on a routine basis, they have come light years from where they were. Before you got no cooperation, no help, no advice. And they have, Rebecca Fugit, if anybody's met her, she has been on top of trying to make sure they are about service. And she's done a wonderful job of that. Now, you may not always agree with what they tell you, but they do try to get answers to you, and it's much better than it was in the past. So I'm willing to pay some for that, some guidance from the state health department. All right, general provisions. This goes without saying. All the waste has got to go to a septic system or a gray water treatment system. They also added in the general provisions here, on that bullet number 1, existing soil absorption components may be used to receive a portion of a discharging HSTS. So that's very similar to what you've seen in the past. If we've used some old leach lines, we've tied in that system to that, but allowed the discharge to happen as well, with the caveat that you got to maintain the quality of the effluent. So we got to think about how can we get a good discharge at the ditch, but still use those older pieces of the soil absorption system. Many of those systems lasted 30 years. You give it a 4 or 5 year rest, you may be able to use it again. You may be able to get off NPDS. That better yet. So we can tie those things in to dissipate some of that effluent. In 2007, that piece was, we didn't have anything like that there. So we're glad to see that come back. This last part is if a reduction is used for the system area, they want you to also protect for the replacement area, protect the full-size system area, similar to what we've seen in the past. Okay, another general provision, the STS can't be sited into a floodway, but the most important part of this here is they try to clarify what we can put into 100-year floodplain and what we cannot. If anybody has 100-year floodplains, can be all hydric soil, or they could be, if there's some slope to them, they can be sand and gravel, because a lot of times that creek is washing out sand and gravel on its banks or on the slopes along the banks. The soil can be very good in a floodplain. But what do you do about that? So what they're saying is no septic tanks, no aerators, no lift pumps in the floodplain, but the leach lines can be placed there if the soil is adequate. So if you get one of those floodplains with sand and gravel, you can place leach lines in that soil. If it's hydric soil, you shouldn't be putting them there anyhow. So they did make some clarification on what can be put into a floodplain. As I said earlier, site and soil evaluators, we can't register them because that's pretty much restricted by state law. However, they did put specific requirements for those individuals in the rules so that they are qualified. And there's a series of groups that they can belong to, credentials that they have to have. Another thing that was done is, and we've mentioned this some in the past, the state legislature was very clear that they wanted a provision for incremental repair and replacement. And what that means is, let's say a person can't afford to put the full 900 square foot of leach lines in, but they can put 450 square foot in because that's what they can afford.